Okay, so I think people are slowly starting to join the webinar now, which is good. Eddie, go on the line still, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm still here, yeah, and it's good to see people are coming on. We're just waiting for a few more to attend, so hold tight. We've got a few more to come on, and just waiting for a few more people to join us. It is 4 o'clock, so we will just start the process off now. Welcome to everyone to our webinar, on which is really around picking the best platform for your e-commerce project. And it's really good to see so many people here. We've got people from the States, the UK as well. There we go. So we've got everyone on now, which is fantastic. So just some general housekeeping, people, before we kick the webinar off. We have everyone on mute, so just be conscious of that. If you do have any questions, please use your panel to ask any questions, and we'll keep them for the end. Myself and John will be sure to get them answered for you. The session is being recorded, so if you feel you've missed anything, don't worry. We will email everybody with a recording of the webinar as well. So just some introductions. My name is Eddie Rice. I am a Customer Success Manager here at i3. I've been here for just under a year now, and my role really is just to make sure people are getting the best out of the solutions they're buying, to make sure they're getting the best value from that as well. I'm based here in Northern Ireland, but I work with customers throughout the UK and the US, which is good. I get to travel a good bit. And finally, I'm a very keen cyclist. I'm an absolute Strava nut, so if anyone else is out there is using Strava, feel free to connect with me on Strava. I'll be, super stoked to share my stats with you and to look at yours as well. Also on the call, we've got Jon Eaton, who's our Head of Digital Strategy. John is a non-techie who's really learned the web platform industry inside out for himself. But more importantly, he's actually worked with all the platforms that we're talking about today. So no better man to share his knowledge and expertise and some success and some failure stories around that for anyone who's looking to implement the e-commerce platforms. He's based in our Leeds office, which is good. But unfortunately, he does support Leeds United, who just got beat by Reading on Saturday. So sorry for that, John. I'm sure you'll follow in with the...
yeah, 2 hours of my life that I'll never get back. But thanks for reminding me of that.
That's no problem. But being a Dundee fan, I can empathise with you. So today's session, people, what we're going to be touching on is kind of 4 main areas. We've got the history of e-commerce, going right back to around about 2000 and talking through the steps and the important parts in that.
Eddie, can I just check that the individual slides are still moving along with you? I've still not got off the first slide, so can you just sort of skip forward a couple and back a couple, so we're not stuck on a lagging? Not sure why that's happening.
Let's see. Can everyone see that now? Can you see that, John? Today's session?
I can see that. Yeah, if you just try going back and forward, that should hopefully...
Go back and forwards.
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. So unfortunately, they do get to see what we look like, John. That's maybe not the best thing. There we go.
Yeah.
I am a proud dad as well. So yeah, we were just touching there that we're going to kind of delve into a kind of short history into the world of e-commerce, and then really delve into the platforms themselves and the communities that support and underpin them, and maybe talk about some of the additional applications that you can use with them as well. And then that will branch in really nicely into comparing the features within all the different product sets and different solution providers, just to give you a good overview of really what's out there. And this is perhaps where John will be able to maybe share some of his experience and stories where he's helped other organizations with their e-commerce journey as well, and then talk about specific use cases to go with that too. But before we do that, our next webinar, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear, is on Monday the 13th of November, which is all around GDPR, that lovely topic that is being brandished out there. But it's quite important that everyone's up to speed into the implications of what it means to them. So if you could email Keith at icdigital.com to sign up, and then we can send you the links to the session as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over now to John, and John's going to kick off the webinar now.
Thanks, Eddie. That was great as an intro. So I think, as you mentioned, the first thing we're going to do is just talk about the history of e-commerce. And this isn't a history lesson around facts that are not interesting, hopefully. It's more there really to sort of try and give you guys a bit of background as to the sort of things that have been important over the last couple of years and that are still important now. So the first period we're going to look at is the period between 2000 and 2010. So if I just click into the next slide here, first thing I'm going to show you is when the different platforms first came into the market. So NotCommerce and EpiServer were the early people into the market. They both came into existence in the mid-90s. Sitecore came into the party in 2001, Kentico in 2005, and then Magento in 2008, and eCommerce in 2009. Sorry, I don't know what I've done there. Can you go back into the slideshow for me, Eddie? Is that okay? Well,
yeah.
Your screen on. Yeah. Cheers. Thank you. It's gonna. Can I just check, Eddie? Can you see this control panel thing here, or is that just what I can see?
I can see the control panel as well.
Okay. Cool. Right. Okay. So sorry about that. Moving on. At the same sort of time, you start to see the development of some of the big players when it comes to the logistics of e-commerce. So PayPal came into existence in the early noughties. Amazon Prime, although not really that famous in this country until a bit later, originally came into incarnation in 2005. And alongside that, you've also got Facebook and Twitter that became prominent within that period as well. So you've gone from a situation between 2005 and 2005 where you've got websites effectively operating as web shops to a position, where's this going here? To a position after that where websites are becoming more e-commerce focused, because at that point you've actually got a marketplace alongside the functionality that's offered. 2010 to 2015 is where we really start to see e-commerce properly set off in the way we understand it today. And I call that the omni-channel customer experience arms race. And that's when you see a bit of a change in mindset in a couple of ways. Firstly, we've got to offer e-commerce goes and people start looking at digital first. So those of us who've worked in the industry for 10 years or more will remember people like HMV who used to really sort of rally against the idea of doing e-commerce, and they wanted to use the website to get people to go into store. And that whole mindset has changed. The whole, if you want website or digital service, you get digital services from my staff has gone now, and people start to look at digital as actually a really important battleground. The omni-channel arms race meant that there was a big development in the 5 years after 2010 in takeovers and big releases. So looking at the top there, which is the platforms, you've got Sitecore released their DMS, Digital Marketing Suite, which had some really great tools in terms of personalisation, marketing automation, and A/B testing, and that was done in about 2011. Kentico followed with their EMS solution in 2013. And then at the end of 2015, we saw Magento launch Magento 2.0, which is a much more enterprise-ready platform. Underneath that, you've got some purchasing going on. So eBay bought Magento in 2011, and in 2013-14, EpiServer and Ectron merged together. So the marketplace started to mature quite nicely at this point. And the next thing to say is that more customer experiences online has led to more integrations with specialist partners. So for those of you who don't know who these three platforms here are, Optimizely is an A/B testing tool, and HubSpot and Marketo are marketing automation tools. So we started to see, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, lots of customers coming to us looking for e-commerce solutions that integrate with conversion tools like this. So what does that mean in terms of what's going on now with the overall infrastructure you're looking at? So from 2000 to 2010, you're looking at a fairly standard infrastructure, so a website CMS on top of a physical server, whereas now we're moving much more towards a full enterprise suite of software products offering a consolidated digital engagement strategy. So we're seeing much more cloud-based hosting environments. We're seeing the e-commerce platform doing the selling, and we're seeing marketing automation and A/B testing partners helping to do that selling. But increasingly, we're seeing the e-commerce platforms integrated with ERP systems and CRM systems as well for fulfillment. So they're much more business-sized systems now rather than just sort of sideline revenue streams as they used to be. And what that's meant is that there's been a bit of a shift in buying behavior. So from 2000 to 2010, everyone was obsessed with buying the platform with the most features. And from 2010 to 2015, people are buying platforms with the most flexibility. And flexibility is an interesting word because that's completely different from one client to another. So I've got 3 examples here of clients that I've worked with. Dublin Bus, so one of the clients we've got here at I3, they've been using EpiServer for about 6 or 7 years now. And some of the clever stuff they've got going on in their site include a fare calculator, which allows you to use multiple services and then transact as a customer buying one ticket from one location to another, regardless of the operators that you're using. There's an integration with a timetable there as well, so you can see when all the different routes are running. And there's also an app deployment from within the same CMS instance. So that's their requirement from an e-commerce point of view. This is a client I worked with in my old agency, Cuba, Amrita Nutrition. They actually moved from not commerce to Magento. In terms of their flexibility requirements, they had over 1,000 products and needed a better way of managing those products than they had previously. A large part of their complexity was around the prescription side of how some of their products could be bought and sold in the UK. So that had to be built into the checkout process. And the thing that they really wanted was an all-in-one platform. So they were very quickly mobilizing themselves into a digital-first business, and they didn't want to go through the process of selecting lots of different enterprise architecture systems. So they've actually gone quickly into using one system that manages their whole business. And then another one here from I3, JP Corrie is a Kentico client. They chose to use Kentico because they wanted a system that was, relatively speaking, an all-in-one system again, but they had some quite complicated rules around purchasing. So a lot of their customers will build up specifications of products that they need, and then they will ask for an estimate, which is then responded to before they can transact. Alongside that, there's an integration into their ERP system because the kind of products that they sell are big enough that actually if there wasn't any way of managing customer demand, it would be very difficult for them to run their business with the amount of space it would take to handle the different products. And also that allows them to help the sell customer on account, which is something we're looking at later on this year for them. They've got a configured checkout, as it mentions here, just to allow them to do that sort of purchasing. So it's not vanilla e-commerce purchasing, it's quite complicated in terms of how that process works. So to kind of give you a bit of an understanding as to how all of these platforms work and what you do, because you don't just buy the platform, stick it in and it works. I've done a section here on platforms and communities which helps you to understand some of the key definitions between what you buy and then what you do to it to make it work. So there's 4 different areas really. There's the core platform, the marketplace that they have, payment gateways that they work with, and then integration partners that they've got established relationships with. So taking Magento as an example, the core platform is Magento. The marketplace for Magento is a place where lots of different developers can go in, create little bits of functionality, and then sell that to other development houses. Payment gateways are people who physically take cash. That's normally related to the main payment gateway of your business. If you use Barclaycard, typically you'll see Barclaycard's own payment gateway being used. Similarly, if you use RBS, it's normally WorldPay or something like that. Then the further integrations, this is normally for e-commerce with ERP providers. So SAP and Sage are 2 very large ones. Dynamics is another one. So there are plenty of examples of smaller systems as well, though, which we're seeing used increasingly by smaller organisations who are moving quickly, because beyond the barriers of appealing to a wider market and getting past that low-hanging fruit in terms of e-commerce revenue, there's normally a really big barrier to scale once you get up to sort of £1 or £2 million turnover, because at that point, unless you're able to manage the actual fulfillment of orders and the stock that sits behind them effectively, it's impossible for you to grow. So how do these platforms compare on partners and platforms and communities? So in terms of the core platforms, marketplace, payment gateways and integrations, first of all, I've just graded these in terms of gold, silver and bronze. This is both a kind of combination of my own opinions, but also backed up by some research. In this case, obviously, we're looking at the Gartner Magic Quadrant for e-commerce websites. And here what you can see is that Magento is seen as a leader in the quadrant. So basically what this quadrant is showing you is the sort of maturity of the product and also how dynamic it is as well, I suppose. Don't worry about having to really sort of read into this too much. There's a blog post we're going to share with you at the end, and also, as Eddie mentioned, we're recording the session, so you can follow this later. In terms of the marketplace, there's no official way of grading the marketplaces, but again, based on personal opinion, I think that Magento still has the best marketplace. eCommerce has got a good marketplace as well. There's a lot of developers who develop some good functionality in eCommerce terms. And Sitecore, because it's very well known, although it's not sold in quite the same community way that you might see within the open source providers. There's a lot of things you can buy into there and plug into it to make it do a bit more. In terms of payment gateways, typically we've seen Magento scoring very well there again, and integrations, again, Magento does very well. And it's because Magento is quite a dominant e-commerce player, particularly at the non-full enterprise marketplace. In the enterprise marketplace, you're talking about organizations like Salesforce, Pardot, Adobe Experience Manager, and so on and so forth. But within the marketplaces that we see most regularly, Magento is very popular. On flexibility, there's a bit of a different story. One of the criticisms of Magento is that it can be a little bit inflexible, particularly Magento 1, which is part of the reason why they released Magento 2. So on flexibility, there is a bit more out there in terms of flexibility with Sitecore, we think. Kentco, which we haven't really mentioned yet, is another very flexible platform. And eCommerce as well has some flexibility, particularly in terms of integrations it's got with some of the other platforms that we offer, which I'll talk about later. So Magento always wins. Well, actually, no, it doesn't necessarily, and there's some really good reasons for that. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is this period we've gone through up until 2015, which is the omni-channel customer experience arms race. And on that, I think I put earlier on that Magento 2 replaced Magento 1. So effectively, Magento have got two different products in the marketplace at the moment. What that means is that a lot of the integrations, payment gateways, and most importantly, marketplace developed plugins and controls no longer work with the newest version of their product. And we also know that Magento themselves plan to introduce end-of-life Magento 1 towards the end of 2018 or early 2019. So from that point of view, they're a big point for them of leverage over the other platforms we've just spoken about. Isn't as strong as it once was. And we're certainly seeing more customers coming to us and saying, what do you think, rather than we want Magento, talk to us about Magento. I think we've mentioned earlier on that the flexibility isn't great for configurable buying experiences. So going back to the examples that we showed earlier on, Dublin Bus and JP Corrie, you'd struggle to deliver, particularly if you're not 100% e-commerce as a business, some of the softer stuff that you'd need around a website to be able to support a complex business. So if there's complexity in terms of how you help the customer to arrive at the right product, or complexity in terms of configuring an order before somebody can buy something, that's normally completely bespoke if you're doing it in Magento, whereas you can use some of the tools that exist within other systems if you're trying to do it in other systems. The other thing to mention is that some platforms sometimes have more mature partnerships. A really great example of that is Sitecore and Microsoft Dynamics. Sitecore and Dynamics have been sold together repeatedly, particularly at the large enterprise level. And what that's meant is that a lot of the teething problems that you normally see in an integration between a CMS and a CRM have been overcome. And not only that, there's some really good reusable things that you could talk about with new customers if you're in an agency position that make a massive difference to organizations in terms of how they process orders. So that is something to be wary of. The other thing to mention is that, I think as I said before, that Sitecore and Kentico have integrations with eCommerce. What that means is that if you look at it in terms of those 5 key areas before, actually, if you amalgamate eCommerce's scores into Sitecore scores and into Kentico's scores, then potentially they've got a set of products there that they can offer to the marketplace which are comparable to Magento in terms of overall fit with what the customer requires. The next area is cost of implementation. I think just something to talk about here is community edition. So Magento is often sold to customers as a community edition, so it's free to use because it's developed by the community for the community. And so does eCommerce, that's got a community edition as well. But that doesn't necessarily tell you the whole story. There are other things to factor into the overall cost. Interestingly, the other platforms, the Episerver, Kentico, eCommerce, and Sitecore don't offer community editions. The next level along, if I can press along, is a basic license. What often you'll find within the CMS and eCommerce community is that they'll have their entry-level community free edition, and then there's a kind of entry point for paid licenses, which is basic licenses, and then you've got the bigger licenses, which I'll show you in a second. Kentico and eCommerce both have licenses that you can purchase, which gives you a level of support and functionality, whereas the others don't. So enterprise cost. So what enterprise tends to mean in this area is that you've basically got access to the company who's developed the software product, and also access to more features. So for example, on the Sitecore Enterprise license, you get access to all of the digital marketing suite. Similarly with Kentico, and for Magento, there are some additional modules that you get, as well as the additional support. And alongside that, you've got the implementation costs. So you'd think, hang on, if Magento offers a community edition, how come the implementation costs can be 50,000 plus? And part of the reason for that is that there's an awful lot that you can configure. So typically, even at the community level, you are talking about a pretty heavyweight piece of kit. What we've certainly seen is that in the Kentico and eCommerce space, there have been projects we've been involved in, where there has been a reduced bill for doing it in those platforms, doing it in Magento. Things like eCommerce, which we used to see a long time ago competing with Magento and with Kentico and eCommerce, so actually dropped off a bit because I think you start to run out of things you can do with eCommerce once you go up to around the 20K level. So next slide, hopefully. What would I go for? Well, if I had to pick a platform, I'd be looking first of all at what integrations it's got, and if it had a mature integration with one of the platforms I wanted to use, I'd probably pick that. Unless, of course, I could see a competitive advantage by using something else. The next thing I'd say is that one of the things that people often do is they'll pick the software almost, without thinking about the implementation part, or pick the implementation part without thinking about the software. Unfortunately, for you to be successful, you need that marriage to work successfully. So I think that's a key thing to think about is, have these people done this before, and is this platform going to fit with what I need? The next thing I would say is I think you need to have a platform with some growing room. If you're looking at a platform and it's 100% right for what you need right now, that probably means that it's 20 or 30% lacking for what you need in a couple of months' time. So that's something else that I would bear in mind, is just has this got growing room or not? And that's the end of the sort of formal presentation part of the session. So back over to you, Eddie.
Thanks a lot for that, John. Very insightful. I hope everyone has learnt a lot from that. Now we're actually open to some questions. If there's anyone who has any questions, please feel free to type them in, and we can get them there now. There's some coming in now. We've got Craig, who's in Bristol, and now he's asked whether any of the platforms are good or bad when it comes to creating content pages.
So I think that's a really good question. It's often a criticism leveled at most e-commerce platforms that they're tricky to make things look nice. But there's a good reason for that. In that, say for example, Magento, which is owned by eBay, they've done a lot of experimentation, and they know that the layout of the product pages that are relatively set in Magento are what works. So there's not much point in trying to sort of spoil that flow of sort of user journey. I think the other thing to mention is that we're seeing a big trend within CMS and e-commerce generally of decoupling of the presentation with the back-end controls. So you should find now that either the platform that you're working with is easier to use in terms of creating a good front end, or alternatively that there's a platform that you can run on top of it. So there are other platforms like Prismic or even HubSpot that you can use to create some nice pages that sit alongside the sort of core e-commerce engine, and that means that you are able to work fairly effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I guess users now have got a lot more control over how the site can look and feel, and it's a lot easier than it would have been back in 2010 to actually do that, and that's been the kind of biggest jump, really. The next one here is from Keith, who's based in Edinburgh, another good Scotsman like myself. He's working with some in-house developers, and he's asking really, how easy is it for someone to pick up the systems and start working with them straight away?
The answer to that is probably not what he wants to hear, but it's very difficult. These platforms normally have a degree of certification before you can actually start to use them properly as a supplier. And that doesn't mean that everybody always necessarily does that, but it does mean that the software vendors themselves recognise that it's certainly to their advantage that the people using the systems have got some training in it. So that's something that I would definitely recommend that they get some training before they start using it, or they will end up in a world of pain. I did a project a while ago with a big insurance company based over in Manchester, where they tried to implement a really basic CMS, so not even an e-commerce platform. And unfortunately, the whole thing had been absolutely terrible. They'd ended up with 3 attempts at deploying the software inside the organisation. They'd gone through about 5 members of staff, and in the end, they got us in for a piece of consultancy, which only cost, I think about £5,000 in the end, and that ended up helping them immeasurably. So if they'd done that at the beginning, it would have saved them a lot of time and money.
Very good. We've got a question from Manoj Dube here. And he's asking, how good is the Episerver commerce and integration with ERP or a CRM and social media as well?
That's a very good question. So with Episerver, I mentioned before that they had the purchase or merger with Extron about sort of 3 or 4 years ago. And that led to a period whereby, to be honest, they were floundering a little bit in terms of support and in terms of how their overall product was working for people like us who are implementing. Having said that, certainly in the latest quadrants with Gartner, we've seen them being much more sort of leading in terms of the functionality that they're releasing back into the marketplace. Going back to your original question, which was around social media and CRM integration and ERP integration, we feel certainly, having sort of turned our back on Episerver for a couple of years, that now actually it's much better, much more stable and much more extensible. So we've got, as we mentioned, a couple of Episerver partners, clients who we work with, and we're certainly looking at what CRM systems you could potentially integrate with for them. As mentioned before, anything that's already been integrated with effectively will be top of our list. And also in terms of social media, because they've got some really nice tools, particularly around cross-domain tracking and integrations with Google Tag Manager, there's potentially an awful lot you can do there. I think maybe the best thing to do after this, if you feel like it, is to have a separate call with ourselves, just to talk about some of the specifics that you're trying to address there with that question.
Brilliant, John. Maybe hope for that to answer your question, but like John says, if you want to reach out to us, drop us a quick email and we can respond back to you if you need any further clarification. We've got one last one now from Jenny, who's in Luton, and she's saying, what is the best way to plan a digital transformation to include e-commerce?
Again, another good question. I don't know who's coming up with these today, but very good, everybody. So I think the first thing to think about is just organisationally, if that's even a word, how the project may disrupt everything, and also who you need to talk to in order to be able to facilitate change. So no surprise in that most organisations who rely heavily on e-commerce or digital transactions to make money often still work in a siloed way. And if you're going to try and truly transform a business, one of the key things is getting all those people to talk to each other. So I think that would be the first thing to do, is to audit the different people, audit the different systems that are involved, and then once you've done that, make sure that you've got a plan in place for making sure that everybody is consulted and brought into the process as required.
Brilliant, brilliant. So that's all the questions we have, guys. We have a couple of questions here for everyone to answer just at the end. We would appreciate your feedback around that. And then if you can, feel free to join us for our next webinar on the 13th of November, where we will be discussing GDPR and how it affects your business.